Third question, where was that third? Back there? Okay.
We've been told that the original Constitution Convention was a runaway train wreck. Is this true?
Another super question. The question was, you know, the history books say that the original 1787 convention was a runaway convention, and I could give you a 15-minute response to that, but I'm not. I'm going to give you the short. The short response is this. The Articles of Confederation Congress, the story goes, the Articles of Confederation Congress called that convention for the purpose of simply amending the articles, and that the delegates showed up and they went beyond that, and that makes them a runaway convention. That's not accurate history. The way that the Constitutional Convention of 1787 got called was a series of a few of the states that had gotten together for a regional convention in 1786, and not enough showed up for a quorum, thought we need to have a convention to do something about the Constitution. And so at that 1786 Annapolis Convention, they passed a resolution that said that there needed to be a 1787 convention for the purpose of, quote, to devise such further provisions as shall appear to them necessary to render the Constitution of the federal government adequate to the exigencies of the Union. Important thing there, when they used the term Constitution, as that term was used back in 1787, they weren't referring to the Articles of Confederation constitutional document. That term as used then, as it's used today in connection with the British Constitution, refers to the political system. So that call in 1786 wasn't to Congress, but to the states, saying we need to have a convention essentially for the purpose of doing whatever we need to do to get our political system working again, because the government was essentially falling apart under the Articles of Confederation. Well, that resolution went out to the states, and it also went to Congress, and Congress didn't do anything about it. Instead, 7 states passed resolutions calling for the convention in Philadelphia, and all of them used that broad language of Annapolis that essentially would have allowed them to rewrite the Constitution, as many expected they would have to do. It wasn't until February 21st, just a few weeks before that convention was scheduled to convene, that Congress finally took that issue up, the Articles of Confederation. And when they took it up, here's what they did. First, New York, which was a state's right, they were opposed, they were against, wait a minute, I'm getting this wrong. New York, which was not in favor of proposing a new constitution, came in and they proposed a resolution to the Congress, which basically called for the convention, but limited that convention to purely submitting amendments to the Articles of Confederation. That resolution failed. Okay? So Massachusetts then submitted a substitute resolution. And it didn't call for the convention. It was simply a statement of Congress's opinion. It said, in the opinion of Congress, we think it would be expedient for the states to have a convention. Okay? They did say in that substitute resolution that it should be limited to amending the articles. But then they went a step further, and they said, and to report back to Congress a recommendation, let me get the right wording here. To report back such alterations and provisions therein, and then they use the magic language, to render the federal Constitution adequate to the exigencies and the preservation of the Union. So the very provision that the Congress did eventually pass, which was merely an opinion statement, had that additional broad language in it, and therefore left it at least open to the delegates as to what their scope of the call was. When the convention convened in Philadelphia in 1787, 10 of the 12 states had authorized through the broad resolution their delegates to consider rewriting the Constitution. So it's just historically not accurate that it was a runaway convention. They came knowing full well that they might have to rewrite the Constitution. But when they were finished, They took that document that they proposed and passed, and they submitted it to Congress, not directly to the states, as sometimes is misstated. It went to Congress. If the Congress had thought that they had overstepped their bounds, all they had to do was reject it. But they didn't. They unanimously adopted the Constitution as it was proposed to them, and then referred it out to the states to call conventions, if they so wanted, as the Constitution required, to ratify it. And then all 13 states called conventions. And then eventually all 13 states adopted it. Originally, North Carolina and Rhode Island rejected it, but then subsequently adopted it. So, the concept that that was a runaway convention just isn't accurate. And it's one of the things I'm glad that question was asked, so it gives me a chance to clear that up. Okay, any other questions? Let me say this before I turn it back over to Jackie. As I said before, the mechanism under Article 5 is not a mechanism to fix and rein in our federal government. It is the mechanism which our tremendously wise founding fathers gave to us. If James Madison walked in right now and he heard all the complaints that all of us have from time to time about our federal government, the question he would ask us is this: why haven't you called an Article 5 convention? So we have only ourselves to look to. The time has now come to do that. As to Georgia, let me say this. Georgia was the 4th state in this country to ratify the United States Constitution back in 1788, I believe. It needs to be the first state that adopts the resolution that saves that Constitution. So, thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to Jack.